Doctors with million-dollar equipment gave up on her. One single dad with nothing but time and love did not. This is the story most people will never hear. About a little girl who couldn't move her legs, a mother who was told to accept it, and a man who refused to. By the end of this video, you are going to feel something shift inside your chest. Because this story is not just about one family. It's about what happens when one human being decides that giving up is simply not an option. Stay with me. Because what this dad did, with no medical degree, no money, no fancy equipment, is something that will make you rethink everything you thought you knew about love and miracles. Emma Richardson was 4 years old when her legs stopped working. Not slowly, not gradually. One morning she was running across the living room floor chasing the family dog. And by that afternoon she was sitting on the kitchen floor crying because she couldn't get up. Her mother, Diane, 31 years old, a nurse's assistant working double shifts at a hospital in Columbus, Ohio, thought maybe Emma had twisted something. Maybe a fall she hadn't seen. Kids tumble all the time. She checked her legs, saw no swelling, no bruising. Emma said they didn't hurt. They just didn't work. By the next morning, Emma still couldn't stand. Diane drove her to the emergency room at 6 in the morning, still in her work scrubs from the night before. Emma in her arms wrapped in a purple blanket with stars on it. And that was the beginning of the longest nightmare of their lives. Over the next several weeks, Emma went through tests that would make most adults break down. MRIs, spinal taps, nerve conduction studies, blood panels, specialist after specialist. Diane sat in every waiting room alone. No family nearby, no husband. Emma's father had left when Emma was 11 months old and hadn't been heard from since. Just Diane and Emma and a purple star blanket. The diagnosis that finally came back was a rare form of childhood transverse myelitis, inflammation inside the spinal cord that had damaged the nerve signals going to Emma's lower body. The doctors explained it carefully, kindly, with charts and models and very expensive words. The bottom line was simple and brutal. Emma may never walk again. One neurologist at a top hospital in Cleveland, the kind of place where millionaires fly in from other countries to be treated, sat across from Diane and said, "We've done everything we can do. You should begin preparing for long-term wheelchair use and look into adaptive programs for children." He said it like he was reading from a page. Diane sat there and nodded. She thanked him. She picked up Emma, walked to the elevator, and the moment those elevator doors closed, she slid down the wall and sat on the floor of that elevator and cried so hard she couldn't breathe. Emma patted her face with one small hand and said, "Don't cry, Mommy. I'll be okay." She was 4 years old. They went home. Diane started researching wheelchairs. She applied for disability support. She told her supervisor at work she might need to cut her hours. She did everything you're supposed to do when a door gets closed in your face. But here's where the story turns. Their neighbor, a man named James Carter, 41 years old, single dad to a 7-year-old boy named Tyler, had been watching everything unfold from next door. He had seen the hospital trips. He had seen Diane coming home at midnight still in scrubs. He had seen Emma being carried in and out of the car for months. James worked in construction. He had no medical degree. He had no special training. What he had was a memory of his own son Tyler, who had been born with severe low muscle tone and told at age 2 that he would probably always struggle with basic physical movement. And what James had done for Tyler, quietly, patiently, over 3 years, had changed everything. James knocked on Diane's door on a Sunday afternoon. He brought a casserole because that's what decent humans do. And while Emma sat on the couch watching cartoons, he sat at the kitchen table with Diane and said something that she would repeat in every interview for the rest of her life. He said, "I'm not a doctor. I can't promise anything. But I've got some time, I've got some knowledge, and I've got 2 hands. Will you let me try?" Diane looked at this man, this regular, ordinary, rough-handed construction worker in a flannel shirt, and thought, "What do I have to lose?" She said yes. "Now before we go further, let me give you some context, because this matters. Transverse myelitis in children is rare. It affects roughly 1 to 8 people per million every year. But what's important is this: the nervous system, especially in young children, has something called neuroplasticity. It's the brain's ability to rewire itself, to find new pathways. to essentially go around the damage and build new roads. A 2019 study published in the journal Neurological Sciences found that early, consistent physical stimulation and movement therapy in pediatric spinal cord injuries significantly improved recovery outcomes, in some cases, producing results that specialists had not predicted possible. The key word is consistent. Not expensive, not high-tech. Consistent. Children's brains are like wet clay. They reshape. They adapt. But only if you keep working them. The billionaire doctors had the knowledge. What they didn't have, what they couldn't offer, was the time. The daily, patient, hour after hour, week after week. Never miss a day commitment that real recovery requires. James had that time. He started coming over every single day after work, still in his dusty work boots sometimes, barely stopping home to shower. He would sit on the floor, next to Emma with a gentleness that seemed impossible for a man whose hands were used to pouring concrete and swinging hammers. He researched everything: pediatric physical therapy techniques, nerve stimulation exercises, sensory integration methods. He watched hundreds of hours of YouTube videos by physical therapists and neurological recovery specialists. He printed out studies. He called a physical therapist friend of a friend and spent 2 hours on the phone asking questions, taking notes on a yellow legal pad. And then he got to work. Every evening, for an hour, sometimes 2, James sat with Emma on a padded mat in the living room. He moved her legs in slow, deliberate circles. He pressed gently on her feet. He played games where she had to try to feel which toe he was touching, with her eyes closed. He made it into a game because she was 4, and 4-year-olds need things to feel like fun. He called it Emma's training. Emma called it playing with Mr. James. Some days she was frustrated. Some days she cried because her legs felt like they belonged to someone else. On those days, James didn't push. He would just sit with her, let her feel what she felt, and then quietly say, "Want to try just one more? Just one?" She always said yes. Tyler, his son, would come with him sometimes and sit doing homework at the kitchen table. Diane would make them all dinner. And somewhere in those months, this stopped being a favor between neighbors and became something else entirely. A family that had chosen each other. 6 weeks in, nothing visible had changed. Diane was trying to stay hopeful, but it was hard. She was exhausted. She was scared. She had started looking at elementary schools with wheelchair accessibility programs. She was doing the practical things because she had to, because hope without a backup plan is just hope. James never wavered. Not once. He showed up every day like it was his job, like it was the most important thing in the world, because to him it was. At 8 weeks, something happened. Emma was lying on the mat and James was running, his thumb along the sole of her left foot, something he did every session to try to stimulate nerve response. When Emma suddenly giggled, "That tickles," she said. James froze. He did it again. "Stop it, Mr. James, that tickles." He looked up at Diane, who was standing in the kitchen doorway. She had her hand over her mouth, because Emma had felt nothing in that foot for 4 months. Nobody said anything for a second. Then James, this big, rough construction worker who had poured concrete and carried steel beams and never cried on a job site in his life. His eyes went completely red. He cleared his throat and looked back at Emma and said, very steadily, "Okay, one more time. See if you can feel this." She could. What happened over the next 3 months was what the neurologist who later reviewed Emma's case called, and I'm quoting directly here, "an outcome we did not anticipate." The sensation spread. Slowly, imperfectly, inconsistently, but it spread. First the left foot, then the right, then sensation moving upward through the calves. Emma started being able to tell when something was warm or cold against her skin below the knee. She started flinching when James pressed a certain point. A reflex response that meant the nerve signal was completing a circuit it couldn't complete before. At month 4, Emma moved her left toes voluntarily for the first time. Diane was sitting right there when it happened. Emma looked down at her foot, scrunched her face up in concentration like she was trying to lift a car, and those tiny toes curled. Just barely, just a little. Diane didn't collapse dramatically. She didn't scream. She just made a sound, a short, broken sound, and put her face in her hands, and her whole body shook. James sat there quietly and let the moment be what it was. By month 7, Emma was standing. Not walking, standing, with James holding both her hands. She could bear weight on her legs for several seconds at a time. Her neurologist, when he saw her at a follow-up appointment and reviewed her new nerve conduction tests, sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "This is not where I expected her to be." He referred her to a formal pediatric physical therapy program. Now that there was visible progress, the medical system engaged differently. They had tools and techniques that complemented everything James had already built. It was like James had cracked the door open, and now the professionals could walk through it. At month 11, 11 months after James Carter knocked on Diane's door with a casserole and an offer, Emma Richardson walked across her living room floor. Not perfectly, with a slight wobble, arms out for balance, tongue poking out of the corner of her mouth the way kids do when they're concentrating very hard. But she walked. James was sitting on the couch watching. Tyler was next to him. Diane was standing at the other end of the room, both arms stretched out, tears running down her face before Emma had taken a single step. Emma looked at her mom, then looked at James, then looked back at her feet like she was having a private conversation with them. And then she walked. When she reached her mother, Diane dropped to her knees and grabbed her so tight Emma squeaked. And then Diane looked over Emma's shoulder at James, and she couldn't speak. She just mouthed two words. "Thank you." James nodded once, pressed his lips together, looked away at the wall for a second. Tyler, 7 years old, sitting on the couch with his homework, said, "Dad, are you crying?" James laughed, the kind of laugh that only comes out when you've been holding something in for a very long time. "No," he said, "I've got something in my eye." He had something in both of them. The story spread the way real things do, not through a press release, not through a marketing campaign. A cousin posted something on Facebook. A local news station picked it up, then a national one. Then the clip of Emma walking across that living room, shaky, wobbly, beautiful, was watched by 22 million people in 4 days. Comments poured in from parents of children with similar conditions asking what James had done, asking for the specific exercises, asking for hope. He answered as many as he could. He wasn't selling anything. He wasn't building a brand. He was just a man who answered his messages. One doctor who commented on the video, a pediatric neurologist with 30 years of experience, wrote, "This is what we know works and too often can't provide enough of. Consistent, patient, daily stimulation by someone emotionally invested in the child. This man gave something no hospital can prescribe." Emma is 7 now. She runs. She chases Tyler around the yard. She has a purple star blanket that lives on the couch. And she doesn't use it to be carried in anymore. She uses it for forts. James and Diane, well, they got married 8 months after Emma walked. Small ceremony. Tyler was the ring bearer. Emma was the flower girl. She walked down the aisle. There wasn't a dry eye in the room. Here is what I want you to take from this. Not just that it's a beautiful story, because it is, but something bigger. We live in a world that tells us that expertise is everything. That if someone with letters after their name says something is finished, it's finished. And expertise matters. It genuinely does. Those doctors weren't wrong about the diagnosis. They were working with what medicine can do in a 1-hour appointment, in a system that isn't built for long-term daily presence. What James gave Emma wasn't smarter than medicine. It was something medicine can't bottle and can't bill for. It was showing up every single day, when there was no proof it was working, when the results were invisible, when any reasonable person would have stopped. There is a version of every single person reading this who needs to hear that right now. Whatever you are trying to do, whatever feels impossible, whatever the experts have told you is probably not going to happen. Showing up every day is not nothing. Showing up every day is everything. Emma's legs didn't start working because of a miracle. They started working because a man knocked on a door with a casserole and refused to stop believing in a little girl he barely knew. That's not a medical story. That's a human story. And those are the ones that last forever.